He trusted that man more than anyone else in the world. Together, they built a company from nothing. They survived setbacks, pushed through crises, and turned a simple idea into a multi-million-dollar business. To everyone around them, they looked like the perfect example of friendship and partnership. But there was one thing nobody saw coming. While one of them was pouring every ounce of energy into growing the business, the other was working towards something entirely different. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just destroy a company, it destroyed a friendship that had taken years to build, a friendship shattered by a betrayal no one saw coming. And the most shocking part, the person behind it all was the man he trusted the most. If you enjoy stories about success, betrayal, and life lessons that change the way we see people, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Now let's go back a few years. Back then, nobody could have imagined how this partnership would end. For years, everyone believed they were looking at an unbreakable team. They weren't just business partners. They were friends, the kind of friends who shared dreams, struggled through hard times together, and genuinely believed they could accomplish anything as long as they stuck together. When they started, they had no extra money, no powerful connections, no guarantees of success. What they did have was determination, courage, and complete trust in each other. That trust became the foundation of everything they built. It helped them survive the early struggles. That would have made most people quit. They worked late into the night, sacrificed weekends missed, family events, gave up comfort and stability for the chance to build something bigger than themselves. And slowly, their hard work began to pay off. More clients started coming in. New contracts were signed, revenue increased, opportunities appeared everywhere. What once seemed like a distant dream was becoming a reality, and as the company grew, so did the bond between them. Decisions were made. Quickly, there was no need for endless paperwork between the two of them. No second-guessing, no suspicion, no reason to doubt one another. The trust was absolute, and maybe that was the problem. Because while everyone saw the perfect partnership, something was beginning to change behind the scenes. Something small, something subtle, something almost impossible to notice. At the time, nobody could have imagined that this tiny shift would eventually destroy everything they had spent years building together. But that's the thing about betrayal, it rarely arrives. Like a storm, it starts as a whisper, a small change, an overlooked detail, a warning sign that seems too insignificant to matter, until one day, it's too late. The business kept growing. New clients were coming in, bigger contracts were being signed, revenue was climbing, and the company was starting to make a name for itself in the industry. From the outside, everything looked perfect. In fact, most people would have said they were living the dream, but it was during this period of success that something began to change. Small things at first, so small that nobody paid attention, not even him. It started with a few meetings. His partner would occasionally attend important meetings without mentioning them beforehand. At first, it didn't seem unusual. After all, they were both founders. They both had the authority to represent the company. After years of working side by side, neither of them felt the need to ask permission for every business decision. And whenever he brought it up, his partner always had a simple explanation. I was just trying to move things forward. It was nothing major. I didn't want to bother you with it. The answers sounded reasonable. And honestly, why wouldn't they? These weren't strangers. They'd been friends for years, but over time, similar situations started happening more often. A client would mention a conversation he had never heard about. A business partner would reference an agreement he didn't remember. Discussing important information would arrive. Incomplete key details seemed to disappear. Reports felt strangely unfinished. Still, none of it seemed serious enough to trigger a confrontation. Every time he asked questions, he got answers. Quick answers. Confident answers. There was always an explanation, always a logical reason, always a perfectly believable excuse. And each time, any suspicion faded almost instantly, because suspicion requires a reason, and in his mind, he didn't have one. For years, this man had proven himself loyal. For years, They had faced challenges together for years. He had never given him a reason to doubt his intentions. So every time a warning sign appeared, he found a way to dismiss it, and without realizing it, he made the same mistake countless people make. He confused a history of trust with a guarantee of honesty. The two are not the same thing. Just because someone has been loyal in the past doesn't mean they always will be. But at that point, he hadn't learned that lesson yet. While profits increased and the company expanded, his focus remained locked on growth. He believed he was building a stronger future, a bigger company, a more secure life. What he didn't realize was that a different game was being played behind the scenes. Slowly, almost invisibly, his partner began positioning himself at the center of everything. He started taking over key relationships, managing important contacts, controlling the flow of information, building connections that had once belonged to both of them, and he did it so carefully that nobody noticed. Nothing looked aggressive, nothing looked suspicious, nothing looked like a threat. If anything, his actions could easily be interpreted as dedication and leadership. And that may have been what made the situation so dangerous, because the biggest betrayals rarely begin with dramatic moves. They begin with tiny steps, small omissions, small secrets, small lies that carry some kind that seem too insignificant to matter. Until one day, all of them connect, and when that happens, people suddenly realize they weren't looking at isolated incidents. They were looking at pieces of a much larger plan. By then, the damage is usually already done, and without knowing it, he was moving closer and closer to that moment. A moment where every ignored warning sign would finally make sense. A moment where every unanswered question would suddenly have an answer. And the worst part, the man walking beside him already knew exactly where this was going, because while one partner was busy building the future, the other was quietly preparing to take it. While one partner was pouring more and more of his time into growing the company, the other was building something entirely different. It wasn't a new business strategy. It wasn't a new expansion plan. It was a scheme. A carefully crafted scheme unfolding right under everyone's noses. By this point, the company had become far more successful than either of them had imagined. When they first started, the contracts were bigger, the clients were more influential, the opportunities seemed endless, and with that growth came new responsibilities, more moving parts, more people, more trust, and that trust created the perfect opportunity. As a co-founder, he had access to everything, every department, every major client, every strategic partnership. He moved freely throughout the organization. Nobody questioned his decisions. Nobody monitored his actions. Nobody saw a reason to, after all. He wasn't just an employee, he was one of the founders, one of the most respected people in the entire company. And that position gave him something incredibly powerful: freedom. The freedom to operate without scrutiny. The freedom to build relationships without raising suspicion. The freedom to quietly reshape the balance of power. At first, it looked like dedication, nothing more. He spent more time with key clients, attended private meetings, held conversations that few people knew about, and whenever anyone asked questions, his answers were always simple. "I've got it covered. Don't worry about it. It's already handled." The responses sounded reassuring, professional, responsible, and once again, nobody thought twice about it. But while those meetings were taking place, something much larger was happening behind the scenes. Slowly, he began positioning himself as the company's central figure. Managers started consulting him before making important decisions. Business partners reached out to him directly. Major clients began viewing him as the driving force behind the company's success. And the most remarkable part? It happened so gradually that nobody noticed, not even his own partner. Month after month, the shift continued, almost invisible, almost impossible to detect, until one day, the company no longer felt like it belonged equally to both founders. Without anyone realizing it, the balance had changed. Meanwhile, side agreements began emerging. Sensitive information was shared only with select people. Important discussions started happening behind closed doors. Critical Decisions were being made without everyone at the table. And every time someone questioned the process, there was always an explanation ready to go. Logical answer, a believable justification, a reason that made any concern sound like an overreaction. What nobody understood was that every move served a purpose, every conversation, every meeting, every new relationship, every carefully chosen word. Nothing was random, nothing was accidental. Everything was part of a long-term strategy, a strategy that wasn't focused on influence alone, it was focused on control. The goal wasn't to destroy the company, at least not yet. The goal was something far more ambitious, to gain power without resistance, to become indispensable, to position himself at the center of every important decision, to make sure that when the decisive moment finally arrived, most people would already be standing on his side. And what made the plan so dangerous was the patience behind it. There were no dramatic moves, no reckless decisions, no actions that would trigger immediate suspicion. It was more like a chess match. While everyone else was watching the piece that had just moved, he was already thinking 5 moves ahead, and that patience became his greatest weapon, because impulsive betrayals often fail, but betrayals built over months, or even years, are much harder to see, much harder to stop, and much harder to survive. Meanwhile, his partner continued believing they were still fighting for the same dream. He kept investing his time, his energy, his commitment. He kept defending his friend whenever criticism appeared. He kept trusting him, day after day, without realizing that each passing month gave that man more influence, more leverage, more control. He had no idea that the person standing beside him was no longer playing for the same team, and when he finally uncovered the truth, he would learn something terrifying. The betrayal hadn't started recently. It hadn't started with a single decision or a single lie. It had been growing quietly for a very long time, piece by piece, step by step, hidden beneath years of trust. And now, the plan was about to enter its most dangerous stage. Every lie has one thing in common. No matter how carefully it's planned, it can only survive as long as it stays hidden. And for a long time, it seemed like nobody would ever uncover what was really happening. The plan kept moving forward. Appearances remained intact. The company was still thriving. Clients kept signing on. Business looked healthy, and from the outside, everything seemed completely normal. But the truth has a way of surfacing when people least expect it, and that's exactly what happened. Ironically, it started on an ordinary day. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just a routine review of company documents. A quick check that should have taken only a few minutes. The kind of task most business owners do without thinking twice. But this time something felt off. A number didn't add up. That clause looked different than he remembered. A detail that should have been there was suddenly missing. At first he assumed it was a simple administrative mistake. After all, companies grow, processes change, errors happen. There had to be a reasonable explanation. But the deeper he looked, the more questions appeared. And the more questions appeared, the fewer answers he found. So he kept digging. And that's when everything began to unravel. Some contracts had been altered. Documents contained revisions he had never approved. Ownership structures showed unexpected changes. Strategic agreements carried signatures connected to decisions he knew nothing about. His pulse quickened. This wasn't a paperwork issue, it wasn't a clerical error, and it definitely wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Something much bigger was happening. For the first time, a feeling he'd been ignoring for months came rushing back. That uneasy feeling, that quiet voice in the back of his mind. The one that had tried to warn him every time something felt strange, every time a meeting happened without him, every time information arrived incomplete, every time a situation didn't quite make sense. For months he had silenced that voice. Now it was screaming, and the more documents he reviewed, the worse the reality became. Major clients had been involved in negotiations he never knew existed. Critical partnerships had been established without his participation. Important decisions affecting the future of the company had been made entirely behind his back. But the worst discovery was still ahead. Because when he finally connected all the dots, he realized something he never imagined he'd have to face. He was losing control of his own company, the company he had helped build from the ground up, the company he had sacrificed years of his life for, the company he believed he was building alongside a trusted friend. For a moment he just sat there, staring, trying to make sense of it all, trying to find another explanation, trying to convince himself there had to be some mistake. But there wasn't. The documents were real, the signatures were real, the evidence was right in front of him. And every piece pointed to the same person, his business partner, his friend, the man who had stood beside him for years, the man he trusted more than anyone. The realization hit like a freight train. It wasn't just fear, it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something far more painful. The collapse of a belief. For years he had believed they were fighting for the same goal. For years he believed the trust between them was unbreakable. For years he believed he would never need to watch his back. Now that belief was crumbling in front of him. And the cruelest part? The warning signs had been there all along. The secret meetings, the missing information, the decisions made without consultation, the convenient explanations, the rehearsed answers. Suddenly every piece fit together, like a puzzle finally revealing the picture it had been hiding. But understanding the truth didn't make it hurt any less, because there was one reality he could no longer ignore. The betrayal wasn't about to happen. It had already happened. While he believed he was building a secure future, someone else had been quietly positioning him for a fall. Within days, what once looked like a rock-solid partnership revealed its true nature. The friendship wasn't what he thought it was. The trust had been exploited, and the man he once considered a brother was about to show just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. At that point, one thing became painfully clear. A confrontation was coming. And when it finally happened, nothing would ever be the same again. Losing money hurts. Losing a business hurts even more. But there's a kind of pain that goes far beyond financial loss. A pain that never shows up on a balance sheet. A pain that can't be measured in spreadsheets. A pain that no new deal, no new client, and no amount of money can ever fully repair. It's the pain of discovering that the person responsible for your downfall was someone who stood beside you for years. As the initial shock began to wear off, he realized he was facing something much bigger than a business dispute. This wasn't just a fight over ownership. It wasn't just a battle for control of a company. It was a battle against his own memories. In the days that followed, his mind wouldn't slow down. Every conversation replayed itself. Every meeting, every piece of advice, every promise, every moment they had shared. It all came flooding back, but now everything looked different. Moments that once felt like friendship suddenly raised questions. Moments that once felt like loyalty now felt suspicious. And the more he thought about the past, the harder it became to separate what was genuine from what might have been manipulation. He remembered the times his partner promised they would always have each other's backs, the celebrations after major victories, the difficult moments when he truly believed he was leaning on a trusted friend. But now those memories carried a different weight, a shadow, a doubt, an uncomfortable uncertainty. Because when trust is shattered, it doesn't just damage the present, it reaches into the past, it rewrites memories, it turns happy moments into painful questions, and that's exactly what happened. He started questioning everything. Was the friendship ever real? Were the words sincere? Were the gestures genuine? Did those moments actually mean something, or had they all been part of a larger plan? The questions followed him everywhere. During the day, late at night, in meetings, at home. And the worst part was knowing he might never get the answers, because some betrayals don't just take away money, they take away your ability to trust your own memories. As the situation inside the company continued to deteriorate, he began to realize something important. The contracts were no longer the real issue. The numbers weren't the real issue. The business wasn't even the real issue. Yes, the financial losses were massive. Yes, watching years of work fall apart was painful, but none of that compared to what he was feeling inside. Because the true damage had happened somewhere else. It had happened to trust. For years he believed he had found someone he could trust without hesitation, someone who knew his dreams, someone who knew his fears, someone who knew his weaknesses. And that was exactly what made the betrayal so devastating, because the person who hurt him wasn't a stranger. It was the one person who knew him best, the one person who understood where he was vulnerable, the one person who knew exactly where to strike. That's why betrayals like this leave scars that last a lifetime. An enemy has to study you. An enemy has to find your weaknesses. An enemy has to figure out how to get close. But a friend already has that access. A friend already knows what matters to you. A friend already knows what can hurt you the most. And when that friend decides to use that knowledge against you, the damage can be unimaginable. At that moment, he finally understood a painful truth. The real loss wasn't the company. The real loss wasn't the money. The real loss was realizing that he had shared his dreams with someone who no longer shared his values, realizing he had opened the doors of his life to someone who had quietly been preparing for his downfall, realizing that the man he once considered a brother had chosen his own ambitions over everything else, and maybe everyone else. From that day forward, something inside him changed forever. Because some wounds heal, some losses can be recovered, some businesses can be rebuilt. But trust broken by someone you truly loved leaves marks that never completely disappear. And while he struggled to process that pain, another reality was beginning to take shape. The company was falling into crisis. Tensions were rising. The consequences of the betrayal were spreading through every corner of the business. And now he faced a challenge even greater than losing a friend. He had to rebuild his life, piece by piece, from the ruins left behind by the person he trusted most. After the truth came out, the consequences followed, and they were far worse than he had imagined. For years he thought the betrayal itself would be the hardest part, but he quickly discovered something else. The real battle doesn't begin when the truth is exposed, it begins afterward. In the months that followed, the company entered a downward spiral. What had once looked like a strong, thriving business suddenly began to crack from every direction. Major projects were put on hold, promising deals fell apart, clients started asking uncomfortable questions, strategic partners began distancing themselves until the situation became clearer. The trust that had taken years to build in the marketplace started disappearing in a matter of weeks, and when trust disappears, the damage spreads fast. Meetings that once focused on growth became meetings about survival. Conversations about expansion turned into conversations about damage control. Every day seemed to bring a new problem, a new setback, a new loss. The empire they had spent years building was collapsing right in front of him, and the most painful part was knowing that none of it had to happen. Night after night, sleep became impossible. Morning after morning, he woke up feeling as if the weight of the world had landed on his shoulders. He replayed everything in his head. Where did he go wrong? When did he stop seeing the warning signs? How had he missed what now seemed so obvious? He searched for answers to questions that didn't seem to have answers. The frustration was overwhelming. The anger was just as intense. But above all else, there was uncertainty. Because losing a business is one thing. A business can be rebuilt. A new opportunity can always be created. But losing confidence in yourself, that's a much harder thing to recover from. And that's exactly what happened. For a while he stopped trusting his own judgment. He questioned every decision, every instinct, every conclusion. He no longer felt sure about his ability to recognize who deserved his trust. For a moment, it felt like there was no way forward. Like everything he had worked for had been wasted. Like the story ended here, defeated, betrayed, alone. But life has a strange way of revealing who we really are, especially during our darkest moments. Because sometimes the lowest point in your life is where you discover a strength you never knew you had. And that's exactly what happened. When he finally hit rock bottom, something inside him changed, not overnight, not because of some dramatic breakthrough, not because a miracle suddenly appeared. It happened quietly. In a moment, nobody else saw. A simple decision. A decision to keep going. A decision to refuse to let betrayal become the final chapter of his story. a decision to start over, without the former partner, without the false promises, without the illusions that had kept him from seeing reality for what it truly was. For the first time in a long time, he accepted a simple truth. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still his to shape. And with that mindset, the rebuilding process began. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't glamorous. Every step required courage, every decision required caution. Every new relationship had to be earned and carefully evaluated. He had to restore the company's reputation, he had to win back clients, he had to rebuild systems, processes, and trust. But more importantly, he had to rebuild himself, and that took time, a lot of time. There were days when progress felt invisible, days when it seemed like nothing was improving, days when the effort felt larger than the reward. But he kept moving forward. One step at a time, one decision at a time, one small victory at a time. And eventually something started to change. Clients began returning, new opportunities appeared, talented people joined the team. The company started breathing again, slowly, steadily. Life was coming back. And while things would never be exactly the way they once were, something even more valuable was being created. A new chapter. A chapter built not only on success, but on experience, on resilience, on wisdom earned through hardship. Because sometimes you have to lose almost everything before you truly understand what matters most. And without realizing it, he was getting closer to the greatest lesson of his entire journey. A lesson that would permanently change the way he viewed business, the way he viewed trust, the way he viewed people, and ultimately the way he viewed life itself. Time passed, and like most wounds, the pain eventually began to fade. Not completely. Some scars never fully disappear, but they no longer had the power they once did. Little by little, the financial losses were recovered. New clients came in, new opportunities emerged, new projects took shape. The business started growing again, maybe not in the same way, maybe not at the same pace, but this time it was being built on something far stronger. A foundation shaped by experience, by maturity, and most importantly by the lessons that betrayal had taught him. As the years went by, he realized something surprising. The biggest loss was never the money. It wasn't the company that nearly collapsed. It wasn't the contracts that disappeared. The greatest change happened within him. The way he saw people had changed forever. For years, he believed trust meant never questioning someone. He believed loyalty meant never verifying anything. He believed friendship was a guarantee against betrayal. Life taught him otherwise, because reality is far more complicated than that. He learned that trust is essential. No business survives without it. No team succeeds without it. No relationship lasts without it. But he also learned that trust does not replace accountability. It does not replace transparency. It does not replace clear boundaries. And it certainly does not replace oversight. Because even the strongest relationships need structure, not because of distrust, but because of protection. Protection for both sides. Protection for everything that's been built through years of sacrifice and effort. Looking back, he finally understood something he had never fully grasped before. The greatest dangers rarely announce themselves. They don't knock on the door and introduce who they are. They don't carry warning signs. Most of the time they arrive quietly, disguised as opportunity, disguised as good intentions, disguised as people we believe we can trust without question. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. Not every threat comes from the outside. Not every enemy is sitting across the table. Sometimes the real danger is sitting right beside us, sharing our plans, knowing our dreams, listening to our fears, learning our weaknesses, and that's exactly what happened to him. The person he trusted most was the one who nearly destroyed everything. The man who shook the foundation of his business, the man who put years of hard work at risk, the man he once considered family, but in a strange and unexpected way, that same person also taught him the most valuable lesson of his life, the lesson that nobody can protect your dreams for you, the lesson that trust and responsibility must always go hand in hand, the lesson that anything worth building is also worth protecting, because delegating tasks is necessary, Delegating responsibilities is smart, but completely handing over the protection of your future can become a mistake that some people never recover from. And maybe that's why this story matters, because it isn't really about business, it's about trust. It's about choices, it's about relationships, and it's about how a few seemingly small decisions can completely change the direction of a person's life. In the end, he lost a lot. He lost money, he lost a company, he lost a friendship, but he gained something nobody could ever take away from him: experience, wisdom, and the ability to rebuild his life with far greater awareness than before. So now I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever trusted someone and ended up disappointed? Or do you know someone who went through a similar betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on this story. And if this story made you think, or if it taught you something valuable, make sure to hit the like button. It helps the channel reach more people and allows us to keep bringing you stories like this. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss future videos. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and remember, trust is one of the most valuable things in life, but protecting what you build will always be your responsibility. See you in the next story.